Figure it out yourself, Laura yelled, her voice sharp over the rumble of the idling engine. The tires squealed as she hit the gas, and in a blink the silver SUV was pulling away from the pumps, her sister's laughter echoing out the open windows. Emily was in the back seat, nearly doubled over, and Claire had her phone up like she was recording the whole thing. I stood there on the cracked asphalt of a rural Montana gas station, the October wind cutting through my jacket. My hand still held my coffee like maybe this was all some misunderstanding, and they'd circle back. But the taillights kept shrinking, disappearing down the two-lane highway that stretched into nothing. 200 miles from home. No truck. Mine was parked in our driveway back in Denver. Just my wallet, my phone, and a sudden emptiness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I called Laura first. Straight to voicemail. Tried Emily's number. Same. Claire had blocked me years ago, after one argument I barely remembered. The silence on the line told me more than any words could. This wasn't some quick prank. They'd meant to leave me here. The air smelled faintly of diesel and coming snow. A semi idled nearby, the driver glancing at me once before disappearing inside to pay. I could feel the clerk's eyes from behind the smudged glass of the store, probably wondering why a grown man was just standing in the lot looking like he'd been dropped from the sky. We'd been on our way back from Laura's cousin's wedding. A fun weekend road trip, she called it. 4 of us in her car, splitting gas money, staying in a cheap hotel. But the whole drive up I'd caught those quick glances between the sisters, the way conversation went quiet when I walked back from the restroom at a rest stop. Just sister stuff, Laura would say, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Now it all clicked, though the clarity didn't help much standing in the middle of nowhere. My phone showed 1 bar of service, enough to confirm that there wasn't a single rideshare for miles. I stepped inside the station, the bell over the door jangling, and asked the clerk about buses. Nothing comes through here, he said, not looking up from his crossword. Billings has a Greyhound, about 40 miles east. 40 miles. I nodded, thanked him, and stepped back outside. The wind bit harder now, making the coffee in my hand feel lukewarm. I stared down the empty road Laura had taken, half expecting, half hoping, to see the SUV return, her laughing, saying it was all a joke. But the road stayed empty. And for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I realized I had no idea when, or if, I'd see her again. The trip was Laura's idea. It'll be fun, she said, leaning against the kitchen counter with that persuasive smile she used when she wanted something. Her cousin was getting married in Billings, and she thought it would be a perfect chance for us to bond with her sisters. Emily and Claire would ride up with us, share the hotel, split costs. I should have known better. In 8 years of marriage, most bonding attempts with her sisters had ended in me feeling like the outsider in my own life. But I told myself it was just a weekend. Smile, be polite, get through it. We left early Friday morning, my truck staying behind in the driveway because Laura insisted we take her SUV. Cheaper on gas, she said, tossing my overnight bag in the back. Emily claimed the seat behind me, Claire behind Laura, and from the moment we pulled onto the interstate, they were in their own little world. At first, it was harmless chatter, stories about old friends, inside jokes from childhood. But then the glances started. Laura would catch Emily's eye in the rearview mirror, smirk, and they'd both look away when I noticed. Claire scrolled on her phone, occasionally snickering before leaning in to whisper something to Laura. I asked once, casually, what was so funny. Laura didn't miss a beat. Just sister stuff, she said, reaching over to turn up the radio. We stopped halfway for lunch at a roadside diner. I tried to make small talk, asked about work, about Emily's new apartment, but the answers were short, polite, the way you talk to someone you barely tolerate. Whenever I glanced up, they were bent over their phones, thumbs flying, smiles twitching at the corners of their mouths. That night at the hotel, Laura booked the room under her name only. Easier for check-in, she explained. We dropped our bags, and within minutes, the sisters were making plans to go catch up with some friends from the wedding party. I was welcome to come, they said, but it was clear I wasn't really invited. I stayed in, watched bad TV, and told myself it was fine. Just one night. The wedding the next day went smoothly enough. I stayed near the bar, talked with a few people I knew, kept out of their way. But even then, I caught those looks, little bursts of laughter when they thought I wasn't watching, quick whispers that ended the moment I walked over. By Sunday morning, I was ready to get home. I told myself the awkwardness would fade once we got back to Denver, that the long drive ahead was just another few hours of keeping my head down. What I didn't know was that they'd already decided how the trip was going to end, and it wasn't with me walking through our front door. The glances started before we even hit the state line. Laura kept flicking her eyes to the rearview mirror, meeting Emily's gaze for just a beat too long before smirking. Emily would lean forward, whisper something, and Claire would burst into quiet laughter in the back seat. Then, as if on cue, they'd all go silent when I glanced over. At first, I tried to ignore it. Siblings had their own rhythm, their own shorthand, and I wasn't part of it. That was nothing new. But the frequency made it impossible to ignore. Every time I reached for my coffee in the cup holder or adjusted the air vents, I catch a flicker of movement in my periphery, another quick exchange, another half smile that never included me. I finally asked what was so funny. Laura didn't even hesitate. "Just sister stuff," she said, her voice light but clipped, like the question itself was ridiculous. She reached for the radio knob and turned up some pop song I didn't recognize, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. A few miles later, it happened again. Emily tilted her phone so Laura could see the screen, whispering something I couldn't make out over the music. Claire leaned in, grinning, and Laura gave a short laugh before straightening her face like she was wiping it clean. "Inside joke?" I tried again. "Mark, you're so paranoid," Laura said without looking at me. "We're just talking." But the tone was off, defensive, almost irritated. I leaned back in my seat and let it drop, though the tension in the car didn't. The road stretched ahead in long, empty miles, and every so often, I'd hear the soft sound of a notification on one of their phones, followed by the low murmur of another conversation that wasn't meant for me. At the lunch stop, it didn't change. We slid into a booth, me on one side, the three of them on the other, and as soon as the waitress left with our orders, the whispering started again. I tried to join in, asking about the wedding, about Laura's cousin's new husband, but the answers came in one- or two-word replies before they went right back to their own thread. It was like trying to step into a circle that kept closing before I got there. Back in the car, I stared out at the passing fields, the wind pushing long waves through the grass. In the reflection of the passenger window, I could see Laura's eyes flicking up to the mirror again, Emily grinning back at her. Whatever the joke was, I wasn't supposed to get it. And for the first time on the trip, I started wondering if maybe I was the punchline. The gas station was the kind of place you only stop at because there's nothing else for 50 miles in either direction. One pump island, a flickering sign, and a dusty parking lot that smelled faintly of diesel. We'd been on the road for hours, and when Laura pulled in, I figured it was just for a quick coffee and restroom break before the last stretch home. I went inside, grabbed a paper cup of burnt coffee, and lingered a moment to stretch my legs. When I came back out, the SUV was idling by the pump, Laura behind the wheel, Emily and Claire in the back. The windows were down, and they were all grinning like they'd just heard the best joke in the world. "Ready?" I asked, heading for the passenger door. Laura leaned toward the open window, her elbows resting on the sill. "Actually," she said, drawing the word out, "we've been talking." I froze with my hand on the door handle. "About what?" "About you," Emily piped up from the back, her smile almost too wide. "You're always so dependent. Always leaning on Laura for everything." Claire snorted. "It's like you can't do anything without her." I stared at them, not sure if I'd heard right. "What are you talking about?" Laura's expression softened just enough to make it feel rehearsed. "We think you need to learn some independence, Mark. You know, fend for yourself a little." I glanced at the back seat. Emily was biting her lip like she was holding back laughter, and Claire had her phone up, recording. My grip tightened on the coffee cup. "This isn't funny. It's just a prank," Laura said, almost sweetly. "You're always so serious. We thought this would be good for you, an adventure." "Laura, open the door." She shook her head, the grin breaking through again. "Figure it out yourself," she said, and before I could answer, her foot hit the gas. The tires spat gravel, the SUV shot forward, and in seconds they were nothing but taillights fading down the empty highway. The wind cut across the lot, cold enough to sting my ears. I stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand, watching the dust settle where their car had been. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out, thumb hovering over Laura's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. Emily's did the same. Claire didn't even give me the courtesy, just a sharp tone and the automated voice telling me I'd been blocked. Somewhere out past the horizon, they were laughing about it. I could hear it in my head. The joke wasn't just leaving me behind, it was making sure I knew I was on my own. I stood there for a while, staring at the road they'd taken, half expecting the SUV to reappear over the rise, Laura leaning out the window, laughing that it was all a joke. But the highway stayed empty. The cold wind picked up, tugging at my jacket, carrying the faint smell of snow. I took a sip of my coffee, now lukewarm, and felt the truth sink in. They weren't coming back. My first thought was to call Laura again. Straight to voicemail. Emily's number? Same. Claire's didn't even ring, just the flat tone and the automated message that I'd been blocked. I tried Laura twice more, listening to her cheerful recorded greeting as if maybe, by some miracle, she'd answer this time. Nothing. I looked around the lot. My truck was 200 miles away, parked safely in our driveway. Laura had been the one to insist we take her SUV. Better gas mileage, she'd said. It hadn't occurred to me then that it also meant I'd have no way home if things went sideways. Now here I was, stranded in a town I didn't know, with nothing but my wallet, my phone, and the clothes I was wearing. Inside, the gas station was warmer but not by much. The clerk, a thin man in a faded flannel shirt, barely looked up when I asked if there was a bus to Denver. Not from here, he said, flipping a page in his crossword. Closest stop's in Billings. Greyhound runs out of there. How far's Billings? About 40 miles east. 40 miles. I could walk it, maybe, but the temperature was already dropping, and the clouds rolling over the horizon promised snow before nightfall. My wallet held $62 in cash, and a debit card that wouldn't stretch far in a taxi. Still, it was the only option. I stepped back outside, pulling my jacket tighter, and stared again down the empty stretch of road. The absurdity of it all hit me, Laura and her sister speeding away, laughing like it was some harmless prank, while I stood here figuring out how to get home from the middle of nowhere. I'd thought about them as family, people I could trust even if we didn't always get along. But family doesn't strand you 200 miles from home just to teach you a lesson you never asked for. This wasn't about independence. This was about humiliation. I thumbed through my phone contacts, found the number for a cab service in Billings, and prayed someone would answer. When a tired-sounding dispatcher finally picked up, I gave him the address from the gas station receipt and asked how much for a ride. $60, he said. I glanced at my wallet. Just enough to get me to the bus station. Not a penny more. Waiting for the cab, I leaned against the cold brick wall of the gas station, the wind cutting down the empty street, and let my mind drift back over the years. The truth was, this didn't come out of nowhere. The red flags had been there from the start. I'd just been too stubborn, or maybe too hopeful, to read them for what they were. The first time I met Emily and Claire was at a barbecue Laura hosted when we just started dating. They were polite enough, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite place, like I'd interrupted a conversation that had been going on for years and didn't need a new participant. They'd exchange looks when I spoke, quick little glances that were gone before I could call them out. Over time, it became the default. Family dinners where they'd slip into stories from childhood, laughing at punchlines I didn't get, never bothering to fill me in. Vacations where they'd plan activities without asking if I wanted to join, then act surprised when I stayed behind. If I mentioned feeling left out, Laura would smile that patient smile and say, "They're just protective. They'll warm up to you." But they never did. After we got married, it escalated. Emily once told Laura, right in front of me, that I was holding her back from traveling more, from taking risks. Claire had a habit of rolling her eyes whenever I offered to help with anything, moving furniture, fixing a leaky faucet, as if accepting help was some sign of weakness. "Not everything needs a man to solve it," she'd say with a smirk. Laura always took their side, or at least never challenged them. If I brought up how it made me feel, she'd wave it off. "Family comes first," she'd say, Like that was the end of the conversation. I started noticing other things too. How Laura would text constantly when we were together, her phone lighting up every few minutes with a message from one of them. How plans we'd made together could change in an instant if her sisters needed her. My birthday dinner one year had been cut short because Emily had an argument with her boyfriend. Our anniversary the year after was forgotten entirely when Claire decided to move apartments last minute. I told myself it was just the way their family worked, that once we'd been married long enough, I'd be part of that inner circle. But standing there in that cold Montana wind, waiting for a stranger to drive me 40 miles toward a bus that would take me home alone, I realized I'd been fooling myself. I hadn't just been an outsider to them. I'd been the punchline to a joke they'd been telling for years, and now they'd finally made it the main event. The phrase, "family comes first," had been Laura's mantra from the day we met. At first, I respected it. I figured it meant loyalty, dependability, the kind of traits you'd want in a partner. But over the years, I learned it really meant her family came first. And I wasn't part of that definition. The first big example was our second anniversary. I'd made dinner reservations at this little Italian place downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and candlelight, because she'd once mentioned wanting to go there. I'd even arranged for the same dessert we'd had on our honeymoon. That afternoon, she called to say Emily had a crisis with her landlord, and she was going to help her sort it out. She promised we'd reschedule. We never did. Then, there was my 30th birthday. I'd invited a few friends over for a backyard barbecue, spent the morning marinating steaks and setting up lights. An hour before people arrived, Claire called Laura in tears over a fight with her boyfriend. Laura didn't hesitate, grabbed her keys, said she'd just be a little while. She came back 3 hours later, long after the food had gone cold. My friends had asked where she was. I made excuses. It became a pattern. Weekend trips canceled last minute because one of her sisters needed her. Holidays rearranged to fit their schedules. Even small things, like a Friday night movie, could vanish if a text came through. And each time, I'd hear the same explanation. "Family comes first, Mark. You understand." I did understand, at least at first. I knew she was close to them. I wanted to be supportive. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about helping in emergencies and became about always choosing them over me, no matter the reason. Emily didn't like her new haircut. Girls' night. Claire was bored on a Tuesday. Coffee date that somehow took all evening. If I ever hinted at being upset, Laura would turn it back on me. "You're being selfish. They're my sisters. You'd do the same if it were your family." But I knew the truth. If my brother called during a holiday dinner, I'd tell him I'd call back after dessert. I wouldn't leave my wife sitting alone at the table. The worst part was how normal it became. I stopped planning anything that depended on her being there. I learned to expect a text or call that would pull her away. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I started bracing for the day she'd choose them over me in a way I couldn't come back from. That day came at a gas station 200 miles from home. And for once, there was no, "We'll reschedule," or, "You understand." Just the sound of her tires on the gravel, and her voice yelling out the window for me to figure it out myself. The cab showed up after nearly an hour, an aging Crown Vic with a cracked vinyl back seat, and the faint smell of stale cigarettes. The driver barely looked at me as I slid in, gave him the address for the Billings bus station, and watched the gas station disappear in the rearview mirror. 40 miles of flat, empty road stretched ahead, the kind where your thoughts get louder than the engine. I tried calling Laura once more, even though I knew what would happen. Straight to voicemail. I didn't bother with Emily or Claire. Whatever point they thought they were proving, they were committed to it. I stared out at the bare fields and distant hills, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the highway, and I thought about just how much effort it must have taken to plan this. The bus station in Billings was a squat, tired building that smelled faintly of grease and coffee. I bought the cheapest ticket to Denver and had $22 left in my wallet. The Greyhound pulled in half an hour later, its dented sides reflecting the orange light of sunset. Inside, the air was stale and warm, the seats stiff and worn smooth from years of travelers trying to find a comfortable position and failing. I picked one near the back, put my bag under my feet, and settled in for the 14-hour ride. As the bus rumbled south, darkness swallowed the road. Towns came and went. Casper, Cheyenne. Little more than a few lit windows in the distance. The hum of the tires on the asphalt became a backdrop to the thoughts I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about being stranded. If this had been a spur-of-the-moment thing, maybe I could have chalked it up to bad judgment. But the way they'd laughed, the way Clara had her phone out recording, the way Laura's words, "Figure it out yourself," had come out rehearsed, it told me this had been in the works for a while. They'd talked about it, refined it, decided exactly how they'd leave me standing in that parking lot. And why? So I'd learn independence? That was the excuse, sure, but deep down, I knew it wasn't about teaching me anything. It was about control. About reminding me where I stood in their hierarchy. About making me the punchline of a joke big enough to carry into their next family gathering. I sat there, knees cramped, my jacket pulled tight against the bus's drafty windows, and realized something else. The worst part wasn't that Laura had left me. The worst part was how unsurprised I felt. Somewhere deep down, I'd always known she'd pick them over me if it came down to it. I just hadn't expected her to make it so literal. The bus pulled into Denver just after 8 in the morning. My back ached from the stiff seat, and my legs felt like they'd been folded in half all night. I caught a cab from the station, staring out the window as familiar streets slid by. I kept telling myself that once I was home, I'd figure out what to say to Laura. Maybe she'd be there, maybe she'd be embarrassed, maybe, against all odds, she'd apologize. But when the cab turned into our street, the driveway was empty. No sign of her SUV. The curtains in the living room were still drawn, just like they'd been when we left Friday morning. The place looked untouched, the way a staged house looks when it's waiting for someone to pretend they live there. I let myself in, the sound of my keys echoing in the quiet. The air inside was cool, almost stale, like no one had been moving around to stir it. My bag thudded against the floor as I dropped it by the door. I called out her name once, then again, softer. Nothing. Walking through the rooms felt strange, like I was trespassing in my own life. The coffee maker was empty, no mug in the sink. The bed was still made, the blankets smooth. In the closet, her clothes hung in their usual neat order. Nothing missing, but nothing that said she'd been here either. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same notepad where we'd written our grocery list last week. My phone was still silent. No missed calls, no texts, not even a snide one from Emily or Claire. For a moment, I considered calling her again. But what would I say? That I'd made it home, safe and humiliated? That I was ready to pretend this was just a misunderstanding? The longer I sat there, the more obvious it became. She hadn't expected me to come back right away. Maybe she figured I'd hole up somewhere out of pride, lick my wounds before trying to talk. Maybe she thought I'd stay stranded longer, give her more time to laugh about it with her sisters. Whatever it was, she'd clearly made no effort to be here when I arrived. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick, like it was pressing against my skin. I went upstairs, dropped onto the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't the emptiness that got me, it was how natural it felt. Like somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd already been living without her for a long time. The gas station had just made it official. I don't know what pushed me to open her laptop. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the gnawing need to understand what kind of person thinks leaving their husband 200 miles from home is funny. The laptop was on the desk in the spare room, the same spot she always left it. I'd never gone through her things before, never had a reason to. She'd changed the password months ago, but I remembered how careless she was about closing tabs when she walked away. I pressed the power button, waited for the screen to light up, and sure enough, there it was, a browser window still open to a group chat. It was her and the sisters. Emily's profile picture was a beach selfie, Claire's some blurry shot at a concert. The scroll bar was long, which meant months of conversation. My stomach tightened as I started reading. It went back to early summer, screenshots of my text to Laura, sent in the middle of workdays, captioned with laughing emojis. Photos of me cooking dinner, of me asleep on the couch, with comments like, "So domestic," and "Dead to the world as usual." It was her and the sisters. Emily's profile picture was a beach selfie, Claire's some blurry shot at a concert. The scroll bar was long, which meant months of conversation. My stomach tightened as I started reading. It went back to early summer, screenshots of my texts to Laura, sent in the middle of workdays, captioned with laughing emojis. Photos of me cooking dinner, of me asleep on the couch, with comments like, so domestic, and, dead to the world as usual. Then came the trip talk. Emily, we should totally ditch him somewhere, and see how long it takes him to find his way home. Claire, OMG yes, he's so dependent on Laura for everything. Laura, you guys are terrible, but it would be hilarious. They'd worked out details like it was a military operation. Which route to take, where to stop so it would be believable. The exact lines they'd use. Emily had even suggested the "learn independence" speech. Laura had replied with a laughing emoji and a thumbs up. The part that hit hardest wasn't the planning. It was how much fun they seemed to have imagining my reaction. Bets on whether I'd get angry or just stand there confused. Jokes about me, calling mommy for a ride. Claire had even made a meme out of a picture of me from last Christmas, complete with captions about being helpless. I sat there reading until the words blurred on the screen. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment. This had been entertainment for them. A project. Something they'd been looking forward to for months. I closed the laptop and just sat in the quiet, my pulse thudding in my ears. I'd been telling myself for years that their little jabs and inside jokes were harmless, that I was being too sensitive. But here it was in black and white. They didn't just dislike me. They enjoyed making me small. And now they'd done it in a way I couldn't ignore. I sat there for a long time after closing the laptop, the weight of what I'd read pressing down on me like wet concrete. There was no yelling, no smashing of dishes, no dramatic outburst. Just a steady, quiet realization that whatever this marriage had been, it was already over. The idea of confronting Laura felt pointless. She'd spin it, justify it, maybe even laugh it off like she always did. And I didn't have the energy for another round of being told I was overreacting. What I did have was clarity, a kind I hadn't felt in years. I went upstairs, pulled the old duffel bag from the closet, and started packing. A few changes of clothes. My shaving kit. The folder with my work documents and pay stubs. The essentials. The rest, our furniture, the kitchenware, the framed wedding photos, could stay. They belonged to the life we'd built together, and I wasn't taking any of it with me. I didn't leave a note. I didn't lock the door. I didn't care if she came home to an empty house and wondered where I'd gone. That was her problem now. My truck was parked out front, still dusty from the last time I'd taken it into the mountains with my brother. I threw the bag in the back seat, slid behind the wheel, and turned the key. The rumble of the engine was steady and familiar, a sound that felt more like home than anything waiting for me inside that house. The drive to my brother's place in Fort Collins was just under 2 hours, long enough for my mind to replay the gas station, the group chat, the years of little cuts that had led here. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just let each memory pass through me and out the other side, leaving a strange lightness in its wake. When I pulled up outside his apartment complex, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. My brother, Aaron, answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a beer. He looked at the duffel in my hand, then at my face. "How long you staying?" he asked. I stepped inside and dropped the bag by the couch. "Don't know yet." He didn't press for details. Aaron never had much use for small talk, and I was grateful for it. He just handed me the beer, clinked the neck of his bottle against mine, and sat down beside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering how to make things right. I wasn't waiting for the next jab or the next cancellation. I'd walked out, and I wasn't looking back. It started the next afternoon. My phone lit up with Laura's name while I was helping Aaron replace the brake pads on his truck. I let it ring out. A minute later, a voicemail came through, her voice tight but trying to sound calm. "Mark, where are you? I came home and you're just gone. Call me back so we can talk." I didn't call back. An hour later, Emily's name flashed on the screen. I let that one die too. Then Claire. Then an unfamiliar number I didn't recognize. Same message, different voice. I was overreacting. It was just a joke. We needed to work through this like adults. By the end of the day, I'd blocked all 3 of their numbers. The next morning, they got creative. Calls from what looked like work phones, texts from numbers with out-of-state area codes. Some were short. Pick up the phone. Others were long, guilt-laden monologues about how I was ruining the family over a prank. I blocked each one as it came in. It was almost mechanical. Ring red, block silence. But with every number I added to the blocked list, I felt the noise in my head get quieter. Laura's messages shifted tone after a couple days. The fake concern gave way to irritation. You can't just ignore me forever. Then, this is childish. And finally, you'll regret this when you calm down. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. One night, Aaron came home from his shift with grease on his hands, and a look that told me before he even opened his mouth. Your wife's outside, he said. Been sitting in her car for 20 minutes. I looked out the blinds. There she was, parked across the street, headlights off. She saw me at the window and got out, walking toward the building. I met her in the lobby before she could knock on Aaron's door. Mark, thank God, she said, reaching for my arm. I've been worried sick. I stepped back. What do you want, Laura? I want you to come home so we can talk about this. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. Nothing? I asked. You abandoned me 200 miles from home and laughed about it. Her expression shifted, the concern cracking into annoyance. It was a prank. You're acting like I committed a crime. I shook my head. I'm done talking. When I turned to go back upstairs, she kept calling after me, her voice echoing in the lobby. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the apartment, Aaron had a beer waiting for me on the counter. That's the last time you let her in your head, he said. He was right. And I was done letting any of them in. Aaron had just gotten home from his night shift when he glanced toward the street and muttered, You're not going to like this. I followed his gaze through the blinds and saw her, Laura's SUV parked half a block away, engine idling. Even from here, I could picture her hands gripping the steering wheel, rehearsing whatever speech she thought would work on me. She didn't wait long. The headlights went dark, the door opened, and she stepped out in a fitted coat I'd bought her last Christmas. She crossed the street like she owned it, heels clicking against the pavement, scanning the building until her eyes landed on the third-floor window where I was standing. She smiled, like this was just another Tuesday night, and not the aftermath of the worst humiliation of my life. I went downstairs before she could knock on Aaron's door. I didn't want him dragged into this any more than he already was. The lobby smelled faintly of old carpet and winter air, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound until the door swung open and she stepped inside. Mark, she said, moving toward me like we were still on good terms. Thank God. I've been so worried. I didn't move to meet her halfway. What do you want? I want to fix this, she said, softening her voice like she was trying to talk a stray dog out from under a porch. Come home. We can talk it through. This has gotten blown way out of proportion. I almost laughed. 200 miles out of proportion, you mean? Her lips pressed into a thin line. It was a prank. You're making it sound like I left you for dead. You left me stranded in another state, Laura. With no ride, no plan, no way home except my wallet and luck. You and your sisters planned it for months and laughed about it. Don't stand here and tell me it was harmless. For a second, the concern in her eyes flickered out, replaced by irritation, pure and sharp. You're so dramatic. This was supposed to be a wake-up call. You rely on me for everything. We thought if you had to figure something out on your own. You mean you thought it'd be fun to watch me struggle? I cut in. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. I took a step back toward the stairs. I'm not coming home. Not now, not ever. You can't just walk away because your feelings got hurt, she called after me. I didn't answer. The elevator doors closed between us, her voice muffled until it disappeared entirely. When I stepped back into Aaron's apartment, he had a beer waiting on the counter. Done? He asked. Yeah, I said. For good. The Monday after the lobby confrontation, I walked into the site office and asked my supervisor if there were any openings on projects outside Denver. He looked up from his clipboard, eyebrow raised. You thinking of moving? Something like that, I said. 2 days later, I had my answer. The company was short-handed on a commercial renovation in Colorado Springs. Steady work, decent pay, and far enough away that I wouldn't be looking over my shoulder every time I went to the grocery store. I took it on the spot. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. The place was nothing special: cream walls, thin carpet, a balcony barely big enough for a chair, but it was mine. No committee discussions about furniture, no arguments over what should go on the walls. The first thing I bought was a battered oak table from a thrift store. The second was a coffee maker that brewed strong and hot, just the way I liked it. The work was solid. I was up before dawn, on site all day, and home by 6 with no one to answer to. I'd make a simple dinner, eggs, pasta, whatever I felt like, then sit out on that tiny balcony with a beer and watch the traffic on the street below. The air felt different here, lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying around someone else's weight for years, and finally set it down. There were still moments when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, and I knew it was one of them trying to sneak past the blocks. But I didn't pick up. I didn't owe anyone a response, and the quiet that followed each ignored call was worth more than any false reconciliation. I started noticing other changes, too. My shoulders weren't always tense. I laughed more at work. I didn't feel the need to explain my choices to anyone. Even grocery shopping felt strange at first, throwing what I wanted in the cart without hearing a voice behind me saying we should be more practical, or save that for next time. On weekends, Aaron would come down, and we'd work on his truck in the parking lot, or I'd drive north to help him with a project around his place. He never pushed for details, never asked if I missed her. We both knew the answer. It wasn't that I'd stopped thinking about what happened. It was that the thoughts didn't stick the way they used to. They'd pass through, leaving me with the same steady truth every time: I was free. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. It was my mother who tipped me off. She called one Saturday morning while I was halfway through changing the oil in my truck. There was hesitation in her voice, the kind she used when she wasn't sure if she was about to help or make things worse. "Mark," she said, "Laura came by the house yesterday." I stopped, rag in hand. "What for?" "She said she's worried about you. That you left after a fight during a family trip, won't take her calls, and well, she thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." I could almost hear the careful way my mother chose the words, like she didn't quite believe them, but wasn't sure. "It's not a breakdown," I said flatly. "Then what is it?" I thought about explaining everything: the gas station, the group chat, the months of petty cruelty that had built to that moment, but what would it sound like? Petty? Childish? Like I was overreacting to a prank? That's the beauty of Laura's version. It stripped the details until the whole thing seemed harmless. "It's problems we can't work out," I said finally. She sighed. "You know I like Laura, but I also know you. Just think about talking to her before this goes too far." After we hung up, I realized Laura wasn't just trying to get me back on her terms. She was shaping the story before I could. If she told enough people I was unstable, that I'd abandoned her over nothing, then every move I made afterward could be seen through that lens. A week later, I heard from an old friend, Josh, who I used to work with. He said he'd run into Laura at a bar downtown. "She said you've been under a lot of stress," he told me, his tone cautious. "That you kind of snapped." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, that's one way to put it." It wasn't just my parents and Josh. Over the next few weeks, I got a couple of texts from mutual acquaintances, half concerned, half fishing for gossip. The questions all had the same shape: "What happened to you? Are you okay? Why'd you just leave?" Laura was moving fast, stitching her version into the fabric of my social circle while I stayed quiet. And maybe that was her biggest mistake, thinking my silence meant she could write the ending for me. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself to anyone. But I started making notes: dates, names, what was said, who it was said to. If she wanted to turn this into a game of narratives, I'd let her run with hers. Because eventually, I knew, the truth had a way of catching up. And when it did, I wanted every stitch she'd sewn to unravel all at once. The decision to call a lawyer didn't come from anger. It came from a need to stop feeling like I was waiting for the next blow. I found her through a coworker's recommendation. Patricia Coleman. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who could dismantle someone's story with 3 questions. Her office was small but tidy, stacks of files neatly aligned on her desk. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything: from the gas station in Wyoming to the group chat I'd found on Laura's laptop. I half expected her to smirk at the word prank, but she didn't. She just wrote notes in precise, deliberate handwriting. When I finished, she set the pen down. "Colorado's a no-fault divorce state," she said. "You don't have to prove wrongdoing to end this. But what you described isn't just marital incompatibility. It's harassment, public humiliation, and emotional abuse. That could matter in how we handle things like asset division or restraining orders." She leaned forward. "From now on, you document everything. Every text, every call, every time she or her sisters show up. Take screenshots. Write down dates and times. If she confronts you in public, note who was there. If she sends someone else to talk to you, write that down too. What about when they call from numbers I don't know? Block them. Immediately. Don't respond to anything, even if it's just to tell them to leave you alone. Engagement is oxygen to people like this. Cut it off, and you control the tempo." It was strange hearing someone talk about my wife like she was just another case file, but there was comfort in it too. Patricia wasn't swayed by emotion or history. She saw a situation to be managed, one where my best move was to stop letting Laura dictate the terms. "Here's the thing, Mark," she said. "She's trying to bait you into reacting. The more you react, the easier it is for her to spin this into a story where you're the unstable one. Don't give her that." I left her office with a folder of paperwork and the first real plan I'd had in months. Back at my apartment, I started a notebook just for this: dates, times, numbers, what was said. It felt methodical, almost clinical, like I was building a wall between me and the chaos. The calls still came, sometimes back to back in the middle of the night. I'd roll over, silence the phone, and write it down in the morning. The visits stopped after I ignored her at the lobby, but the messages got longer, more desperate, more pointed. I didn't respond to a single one. And each day I didn't, it got easier to remember that this wasn't about winning her back or proving her wrong. It was about ending it on my terms, without giving her the satisfaction of pulling me back into the mess. Patricia called me in on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice over the phone had been steady, but there was a sharpness to it, like she'd been waiting for this moment. When I got to her office, she already had a folder open on her desk, pages spread out in neat rows. "Your wife's been busy," she said, sliding a stack of printouts toward me. The first was a screenshot from Instagram. Laura and her sisters in a bar, raising shot glasses, faces lit by neon. The timestamp was the same night I'd been sitting on a cold bus headed back to Denver. The caption read, "Girls' Weekend, freedom never tasted so good." I flipped to the next one. Another photo, this time Emily wearing my old Rockies cap, the same one I had left in the car when I went into the gas station. The comments underneath were a chorus of laughing emojis and inside jokes I didn't understand. Patricia tapped the next set of pages. "And here," she said, "are the group chats. Your wife was careless with her privacy settings. Our investigator was able to pull weeks' worth of messages from cloud backups." I scanned them, my stomach tightening with each line. They weren't just talking about the Montana trip. They'd been building up to it for months. Claire suggesting they test how long it would take me to crawl back. Laura sending screenshots of my texts, mocking my choice of words. Emily betting I'd call my mom before I even got to the city limits. Some of it I'd already seen on Laura's laptop that night I left. But this was worse, more detailed, more gleeful, and without the filters of someone who thought they were safe from being caught. Patricia watched my face as I read. "This destroys her narrative," she said. "She can't claim fear or abandonment when she was celebrating your absence in public. And the premeditation in these messages? It shows intent. Not a misunderstanding. Not a harmless joke. Deliberate humiliation." I set the papers down, the weight of them heavy in my hands. For months, she'd been trying to paint me as unstable, as someone who'd snapped without warning. But here it was, her and her sisters laughing about it, preserving the proof in their own words. Patricia closed the folder with a quiet finality. "We'll file this with our response. Once it's in the record, her version of events collapses. Judges don't like being lied to." Walking out of her office, I didn't feel vindicated so much as steady. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity, documented and undeniable. Laura wanted control of the story. But stories only hold if the paper doesn't tear. And now, I had my hands on the edges. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee that had been sitting too long. I wore the only suit I owned, the same one I'd worn on my wedding day 8 years earlier. It fit differently now. Less tight in the shoulders, looser in the chest, like even the fabric knew I'd been carrying less weight lately. Laura sat at the opposite table, her attorney a polished man in a navy suit who looked like he billed by the glance. She'd lost some weight, her hair shorter than I remembered, but when our eyes met she tried to smile, like we were still allies instead of opponents. I didn't return it. Her lawyer went first. He painted me as a husband who had overreacted to a minor family misunderstanding, claiming I'd abandoned Laura without warning, refused counseling, and was now trying to punish her for a harmless prank. He used words like erratic and impulsive, leaning hard on the idea that I'd simply walked away from a good marriage in a fit of pride. When it was Patricia's turn, she didn't raise her voice or rush. She began sliding exhibits onto the judge's bench like she was laying bricks, one at a time, each perfectly in place. Screenshots of the group chats where Laura and her sisters planned the gas station drop-off. Social media posts from that same night, Laura and her sisters celebrating my absence. Time-stamped, geotagged, undeniable. This was not a misunderstanding, Patricia said evenly. It was a coordinated act, discussed for months, executed with the intent to humiliate my client. The petitioner's claim of fear or instability is incompatible with her behavior during and after the incident. Laura's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him down. Patricia wasn't done. She presented my call logs, the block numbers, the dates and times of unwanted contact after I had made it clear I wanted no communication. And finally, she said, we have testimony from mutual acquaintances corroborating the petitioner's celebration of this event, as well as her attempts to discredit my client's character in the weeks following. When Patricia finished, the judge reviewed the files for a long, quiet moment. His face gave nothing away until he set the papers down. Based on the evidence, he said, the court finds no basis for the petitioner's claims of abandonment or abuse. The divorce is granted. Assets will be divided equally. No spousal support will be awarded to either party. Laura's shoulders stiffened, her lawyer leaning in to whisper something that made her eyes flash. I didn't stick around to hear it. Patricia gave me a small nod, the closest thing to a victory lap I'd get. As I walked out of the courtroom, the air felt cleaner, sharper. 3 years after that gas station, the chapter was closed. And this time, I was the one leaving, on my own terms. 6 months after the hearing, I signed the paperwork to make Thompson Contracting official. It started small, just me, a rusted work truck, and a stack of business cards I'd printed at the local office supply store. My first jobs were modest, repairing decks, remodeling bathrooms, patching drywall. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work, and the customers appreciated someone who showed up when he said he would. Kevin was my first hire. He knew his way around a job site and didn't need his hand held. A few months later, Marcus came on board after hearing about what I was building. The three of us worked like we had something to prove, not to anyone else, but to ourselves. We didn't cut corners. We didn't overpromise. Word got around faster than I expected. Calls started coming in from people who'd been burned by contractors before, looking for someone they could trust. The money wasn't life-changing at first, but it was steady, and every dollar came without strings. No shared bank account, no debates over how to spend it. I bought a small house on the west side of Colorado Springs with a garage big enough to hold my tools, and a yard where I could drink coffee in the mornings without hearing anyone tell me I should be doing something else. The rhythm of my days became something I actually looked forward to. Up before sunrise, coffee in hand, planning out the job schedule. On site with the guys by 7, working until the light faded. Evenings were quiet, sometimes too quiet, but they were mine. I cooked what I wanted, watched whatever was on, and went to bed without the weight of someone else's disappointment hanging over me. I'd see Laura's name pop up once in a while in conversations between old acquaintances, usually followed by the kind of pause people use when they're deciding whether to say more. I never asked. Whatever she was doing now, it had nothing to do with me. There were still moments, pulling up to a job site in the early morning fog, hearing Kevin and Marcus laughing while unloading tools, when I'd think about the gas station, the bus ride, the apartment I first rented after leaving. And I'd realize how far I'd come since then. Not just in miles, but in the way I carried myself. I didn't build the business out of revenge. I built it because I'd spent years letting other people decide my worth. Now, every nail driven, every invoice paid, every satisfied customer was proof that I could stand on my own. And standing on my own felt better than I ever imagined. It was a random Tuesday afternoon when I ran into Marcus at the hardware store. We were both in the screws and fasteners aisle talking shop, when he smirked like he'd been holding on to something just for me. "You hear about Laura?" he asked. I hadn't thought about her in months. "No. What about her?" "Divorced again. Married some guy from her office about 6 months after your split. Didn't even last a year." I didn't ask for details. I just nodded and reached for the box of screws I came for. Marcus wasn't done. "Claire's out of her job too. Something about HR complaints. Guess her attitude didn't play as cute in a professional setting. And Emily? Got caught badmouthing a client on social media. Company dropped her." It didn't hit me like I thought it would. No rush of triumph, no vindication. Just a kind of quiet acknowledgement, like seeing the last piece of a puzzle click into place. The truth was, their downfall had nothing to do with me. They just kept doing what they'd always done, pushing too far, acting like there were no consequences, until the world outside their little circle pushed back. Driving home, I thought about that gas station again. The October wind, the taillights fading down the highway, the bus ride with nothing but my own thoughts for company. Back then, I thought the worst part was the humiliation. Now, I realized the worst part had been how small I'd made myself for years just to keep the peace. I pulled into my driveway and unloaded the supplies for the next day's job. Kevin's truck was parked out front. He was already in the garage, sharpening blades for the table saw. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh coffee. My space, my rules, my life. I didn't need to gloat over what had happened to them. I didn't need to call anyone and say, "See? I told you so." The best revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was showing them I didn't need to prove anything at all. Laura once told me I couldn't just disappear when my feelings were hurt. She was right about one thing. I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. I moved on. And in doing so, I left her, and her sisters, exactly where they'd put me that day in Montana. Behind me.